Welcome back to OTR. What do you want to talk about this morning? Anything on your mind? Let's talk about the historic election with the Sunday Roundtable. Joining us this morning, Democratic political analyst Marianne Marsh and Republican political analyst Rob Gray. All right, let's start at the very beginning. Let's start with the sweeping victory of President-elect Trump. Rob, let's go first. His coalition grew just about everywhere, including here in Massachusetts. And in the end, frustration over inflation and the economy far outweighing the concerns about Donald Trump's rhetoric and his behavior. Was this clear all along?
Well, here's what happened. Trump won for three reasons: illegal immigration, inflation, and Americans in the center rejecting the identity politics of the left and the Democratic Party. Those all combined for American voters going in. Exit polls show 70% of voters thought America was on the wrong track. And that's what carried the election for Trump. It's as simple as that.
Marianne, was it clear?
I think there's a bigger point here, which is Donald Trump had 9 years to literally brainwash half the country that America was terrible, that the economy was tough, no question about it, inflation, all that, but just demeaning the country. And you could hear his supporters verbatim repeating the lies he told about the country for 9 years. And the fault is with the Democrats and others for not confronting him. He had the open field for 9 years to say whatever he wanted. And most of it, all lies. But it worked. And I think Democrats let him do that. And there was no one voice or one opposition to all that he was saying. And the irony of all this is the people who supported him are going to be the ones who are going to be most harmed by it.
All right. Well, now that Trump has won, will he double down on promises of mass deportations, trade tariffs, or will we see more moderation? We are hearing about executive actions potentially on day one regarding some of these campaign promises. What do you think, Rob?
Well, I think on things like tariffs, he renegotiated NAFTA in his first term. I think he'll moderate on some of those things. Immigration is such a big issue, such a pressing issue for the country, that there's no way he's going to moderate on that. He's going to do everything he can to try and reverse the influx of illegal immigrants that have come in and that are really hurting the country and hurting our state's economies.
I mean, we have to wait and see what he does, but do you think he'll moderate? What do you think?
No, I mean, first of all, the Trump team said the first thing they're going to do after the inauguration is to deport 10 million immigrants. And the morning after the election in Lawrence, in a school there, students were going around asking, am I going to be deported? Are my parents going to be deported? Are my grandparents going to be deported? So that's the real life effect of it. And it's going to be very military style, go to homes, go to workplaces, take people, put them down in South Texas where they're building these facilities now, and deport them. It will be chaos. And on the tariffs, he might wait a little while, but the fact is he's going to do that too. 60% on China, 10% on others, and it is going to collapse most people in this country's ability to pay anything, and the inflation looks easy by comparison.
Let's just unpack what's here. And Trump, if you look at the electoral map, there's a lot of red on the electoral map. Trump won the popular vote. Trump won the electoral college. There's no question about it. But let's talk about Kamala Harris for a second here. She did not convince the majority of Americans that her policies would have made their lives any better. Did she miscalculate her message, or was it just an outright rejection of the Biden-Harris administration, Marianne?
It was Kamala Harris had 107 days to do what people do in 10 years, 2 years.
So should Biden have gotten out earlier?
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody thinks that now. And in fact, Biden did say he was going to only do one term. And then we all remember kind of getting slow rolled into he's going to run again. And I remember having conversations with people saying, are we really going to do this? And we all know there was no New Hampshire primary. There was a write-in, but there was no New Hampshire primary. There was no Iowa caucus. So everyone slowed into it. And I don't think anyone could do this in 107 days and be successful, but she was exceptional. I mean, she ran a great campaign.
Rob, what do you see?
I think her campaign ran out of momentum, but remember, the vice president assured us that Biden was sharp as a tack, so it's hard to criticize Biden for not getting out sooner when she's out there saying that publicly. But on the issues, defund the police, sanctuary cities, ban gas stoves, males playing women's sports, the vice president was in the wrong place. America is a centrist country. They didn't like those ideas, and they rejected it. It's as simple as that.
Do the Democrats need to improve their messaging here? Is that what it is?
I mean, for everyone who's saying she should have gone on Joe Rogan, like that's not the answer. It's no one thing, but there is a larger issue here, which is, and I was thinking about this a lot the last 2 days or so, the language that is used. I mean, there's a lot of buzzwords and things, and the guests on our show, I've had the conversation with them. It's very exclusionary. I mean, using words like, agency and uplifting and all this, there's a whole language that most people in this country and even in Massachusetts don't understand. And they don't feel that they're invited into the process, that they're part of it. And I think that makes a big difference.
Adrian Walker wrote in the Globe this week, and I want to quote it. "What I see Wednesday is a nation that still cannot wrap its head around the idea of a woman president, much less a black Asian woman president." Is he accurate, Rob?
I don't think so. I mean, there's 13 female governors as of the 2024 elections. America's ready for it. Kamala Harris was just the wrong candidate. She didn't introduce herself properly. I think you're right. She didn't have enough time to do it, in part. But I mean, look at the 2020 Democratic primaries. Her party wasn't even ready for her as a candidate. She didn't even make it to 2020 as a primary candidate. So, it's the candidate. It's not the fact that she's a woman.
So in 248 years of this great country of ours and billions of women, not one has been suitable to be president of the United States. Hillary Clinton, who ran against Trump the first time, a United States senator, a secretary of state, couldn't beat Donald Trump because of sexism. Kamala Harris, DA, Attorney General, United States Senator, Vice President, couldn't beat Donald Trump. And so, no, you cannot tell me. And Donald Trump, by the way, the first convicted felon to ever serve as president of the United States. And 34 convictions, charges waiting. Go down the list, all of it. And yet, no, hold on. The fact is, this country is sexist. And there are so many women out there, and yet the country has decided they'd rather have a felon, a sex abuser, go down, all the charges, failed bankruptcies and everything else is better to be president than any woman, including Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, and that's a fact.
Listen, I'm just going to say, I'm no Trump fan, but the Democratic Party lost its base. It's become the educated, urban, suburban party. Look at Fall River and New Bedford. They were with Trump.
No women could be president. That's shameful.
We continue on the record. Stay with us.